Session can be very challenging, but it may or may not be. Really, that's personal. And whenever you do something challenging, often there's the point where you really personally wonder, why am I doing this? Or should I be doing this? And I think in the process of something difficult, it's really important to let that question go and just find out, to do what you set an intention to do and really see it through, and then find out the answer to those questions through that process. Also, coming into session, it's worth having some practical knowledge about the schedule, how much sitting there is someone teaching the session that I have an affinity with, and maybe training your body up to that much sitting, making sure that you do have an affinity with the teacher who's teaching the retreat. It's worth reflecting on why you are doing it. And that reflection doesn't necessarily have to come up with an answer that you can put into words. But if you can look within yourself at whatever movement is bringing you into the session, and stay in touch with that as you move into the retreat, that's a clean way to do it.
Retreat schedule is something that the body gets used to eventually. It may take a little bit to get used to where things are and how it goes. And so it's really normal and natural to feel like you don't know what you're doing. And while that may sometimes be really uncomfortable, it's also a really natural way to feel when you're first starting out. The thing that I tend to notice in retreat, and I really noticed it the first time I went on a retreat, was that the schedule and the amount of meditation can be pretty tiring. And it's almost like your battery runs down, but then it's sort of like plugging into the wall. Like you can really find rest in the way that in a retreat you don't have to make very many decisions at all. There's just not a lot of, you don't have to think, even though that's what happens. The practice really carries you, and the process and all of the people that you're practicing with can carry you, and you can be carried by the process, by the schedule, by the retreat itself. And there are times when you can check in with the teacher and just let them know how you're doing and ask questions. That's an important part of it. But just returning to whatever's happening, whatever your experience is, and knowing that it will change.
So when you come to a retreat for the first time, you're going to be filled with lots of expectations. You have ideas about what it's going to be like. And basically, except for the logistics of your special needs and physical difficulties and diet and so forth, everything else is just all of your expectations and worries and concerns basically serve the function of standing in the way. And the more you set those aside and simply follow the schedule, do what you're asked to do, sit when it's time to sit, eat when it's time to eat, everything else will come forward from that. The entire sesshin or retreat or whatever it is will unfold in the best way possible if you just set aside your expectations and worries and just do it.
Really enjoy the time that you've given yourself to be intimate with yourself and to just really bring up that feeling of ease and space that we don't often have in our lives outside of the monastery. And for me, it was actually important on my first retreat to have a few options of how I sat. So I feel like the container can be so formal that you feel that a lot of your time initially is feeling like you have to conform. I think the idea of actually bringing relaxation and joy immediately into the practice is really important. if you don't practice that straight away, it's hard to find that later. So saying, I'm going to have a chair and a cushion. I'm going to really enjoy this cup of tea sitting in the sun. And your own body, like, be just completely devoted to your breath and see what that's like.
Well, my only advice would be to let go of all ideas you have about what it'll be like and just be present. Relax, take a deep breath, and trust that everything will go as planned. Of course, we don't really know what the plan will be, but everything will unfold for you. That you'll be able to handle it, whatever comes up, you'll be able to handle. It'll be just routine. Things will be the same all the time. But every time you sit down for Zazen, it'll be different. And to expect that, and expect nothing else, and just allow things to unfold. It'll be interesting and fun and exciting and difficult all at once. And it's a wonderful activity, and especially your first time. So really pay attention and be there. Just be present and accept whatever happens.
Well, I think firstly, if you've never been to a Zen retreat, it's like nothing else you've ever done. So it's really important to relax, rest into the schedule, because everything is scheduled. So let that support you in your effort. So when you're in the Zendo meditating, you really take yourself in hand and do your best to stay with the practice, which may be counting your breath or following your breath or listening to sound. And when you're not in the Zendo, you fully pay attention to whatever's going on. So at the meal, it's time to eat and put all of your attention there. And when it's resting time, be sure you rest. Be sure you rest enough. Not only rest, but really relax. Deep relaxation and sweetening your heart as you encounter a really new experience, which you can't anticipate. You don't know what's going to come forward. So you can have moments that are wonderfully calm and open and joyful, and then you can fall into a pit of your worst mind states, and they all keep going. They all keep rolling along and passing. So that's another thing to allow and know. So you can count on your own experience to be exactly the right retreat experience for you this very first time.
So one of the things that I think is a surprise is how much of relief being in a silent retreat is. I mean, I'm a pretty extroverted person. I like to interact with people. And one of the things at our retreats is that we're in silence. We, are not in conversation with people. We don't read. And on the one hand, going into that sounds like, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to do that? But it ends up to become such a relief to be able to set aside all of that and just really concentrate on meditation practice. The second thing is that coming to a week-long silent retreat allows the mind to settle down in ways that is just really hard to do when you're meditating occasionally. When I first came to a retreat, I was meditating once a week. And so I came to a retreat here, and by doing it period after period, day after day, the mind really, first it can get active, and then it just began to get very, very quiet. And I began to have insights into that I just hadn't before. After focusing that much on your meditation practice and being in the practice container of the retreat, sometimes we can find it a little disorienting, and that's just a normal part of the process. That kind of disorientation usually doesn't last very long. one of the things that I think is really important when we leave a retreat is being clear about how we return to the practice in our ordinary life. And so practicing with other people, practicing with the local Sangha,